Good evening. As of right now, we only have two people watching live. Hopefully some will jump on here in a moment, and I know several are going to watch the replay. I do see the number jumping up slightly as we go here. So tonight we're back with CCKF On Air. It's been a little while. We took a break for the summer. We had two episodes. I believe it was just two prior to the summer break, and now that summer has uh, hopefully come close to an end and fall's coming. Seth from North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission had some time and reached out to me, said, "Hey, I'm ready to start the lives back up whenever you are." So we chose tonight, and so tonight he's going to talk about fish measuring, fish sampling techniques that they around the around our local lakes. How they sample them, and I guess maybe the kind of things they find. He'll get into that, but we're glad to have him back, and he's add him to the stream here. Hey Seth, how you doing this evening, man?
Good, Mitch. How are you?
I'm doing good. Glad to have you back. These were very popular before, and I think they're going to continue to be popular. Definitely educational for me. Um, so with that, I mean, you can go ahead and how's your summer been?
Oh, pretty good. We've been busy. We've been out on Harris a lot this summer, and we've been up at Hyco a lot this year.
And
Um,
I know you guys
yeah,
did a lot of native grass planting.
yeah,
I think I saw you doing some lumberjacking.
yeah. We cut
And
down 46 trees in my district this year. It's the first time we've done that in about a decade. So added some more good big wood to the water. So
good.
that's more for fishing than it is for the fish, but definitely helps.
Yeah, I like the wood. So
Yeah.
you can pull up your presentation at any time,
All
and
right.
um,
Let's see how I share here. There we go. Share screen.
oh, I have to add it. There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
Saw it pop up on my screen. I forgot I had to add it. So,
Yeah, so today we'll cover, like you said, we'll cover basically how we sample not only largemouth but all of our game fish species here in the Piedmont. I'm part of our game fish management group. We have a whole nother group that does all of our non-game fish, and they do all kinds of different survey methods for those fish in streams and small rivers. But today I'll just cover our big reservoir sampling basically.
okay.
And just in case we got any new viewers out there, I am Seth Mycko. I'm newly promoted, so I am now the District 5 district biologist. Just got promoted in June. So I moved up, and we're based here in Mebane, North Carolina, almost smack in the center of the state. I finished up at Clemson back in 2017 with my master's in wildlife and fisheries ecology. Fished on the Clemson bass fishing team there as a college angler. Now I'm just a member of a small bass club here in Alamance County. So I could be behind you in a bag line someday. Just want to remind the fishermen that we're not only scientists, but a lot of us are anglers too. And this is the breakdown of all our biologists throughout the state. This should be pretty accurate now, except for me here in District 5, and District 1 is going through a few changes as well. But outside of that, this is the current breakdown of most of our folks out there. And we started our own podcast this year. Back in May, I think they started it up. It's our coastal region supervisor and our assistant chief of fisheries is running that. And they're calling it, they're both bald or mainly losing all their hair on top. So they're calling it Better Fishing with Two Bald Biologists. So you can look for that on just about every platform you get your podcast at. And it's
Now is Corey Ben is the higher up guy, right?
no, Corey is.
Corey's higher.
chief.
Okay.
Yeah. He's my former supervisor. Now he's in Raleigh.
Okay. And I don't know why I thought Ben was one of the regional guys. Is
Yeah,
he regional over coastal? Is that
yeah,
what he
he's
is?
the coastal region supervisor.
Okay. I got you. So Corey is not even listed on that map you showed me.
No, he's in
high
Raleigh.
up
He's
here and get put on a map. So
yeah.
all right.
And just some updates for everybody before we get into the meat of the presentation today. This year we potted way more than 3,200, but we planted right at 3,200 pots and throughout the entire state. So that was mainly at Harris, Hyco, and Tuckertown. I know at Hyco we did close to 1,000. And at Harris, I bet they did every bit of 1,000 to 1,400. So, Townsend has an asterisk here because we're probably going to cease our plantings at Townsend. It's been very lackluster there. We've given it about 12 years and nothing seemed to be spreading. So I'm probably going to move our efforts away from Townsend in the future. And everything's looking good. This was a great year for water willow. We've seen a lot of spread with our water willow sites. And just, slow and steady wins the race with this stuff. It's not going to happen overnight. And hopefully, if we continue planting thousands of pots a year, it'll continue to spread out there. And the newest addition that we're trying is a plant called coontail. It fragments, and it doesn't have to be on the bottom necessarily. It just grows in the water column. It can grow on itself.
Oh, wow.
So they planted it in these floating cages with buoys on them. They're like basically what you build a little fence out of and put floats all around them, get them to float, and then mark them with a buoy. And then they stuffed them full of this eelgrass in the bottom, and hopefully that eelgrass will grow in there and then fragment off and take in other places.
Do you have to come back eventually and for it to spread? Do you have to come back at some point and remove the cage, or?
That would be the ultimate goal. This is the first one we've ever put in. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how successful we are. And this might even be the first lake we've ever done this species at. We're doing something similar with eelgrass with a similar cage. This is definitely the first time we've ever done a floating coontail cage. And it's a native species, but it'll behave a lot like hydrilla. If it gets going, it'll grow in those dense mats in deeper water is what we're hoping it'll do.
Okay.
So that's good. And then, like you said, we've been, especially in my district this summer, we've been out there cutting some trees down. We went to 5 of our lakes, and then Tuckertown this year. We did 46 trees at those lakes, and we basically will just cut them down, let them fall into the water, and then we cable them back to their stump. And then that just gives, fishermen somewhere to fish, and then, the big bass somewhere to hide. So those won't last too long. They'll probably last 8 years if we're lucky.
I was actually wondering, should I ask this question? How long when you fell a tree like that? How long?
Yeah, 8 to 12 years. 12 for a great big one. We didn't cut a ton of giant trees down, so I'd say about 8 years for most of what we did this summer. Okay. Yeah, and Lake Michael, tiny little reservoir here in the city of Mebane. We did a good amount there at Michael, if anybody knows where that is.
So Alex was actually asking about the coontail, about the growth rate.
Yeah, it's a native species, so it'll be slower. It's not going to take off by no means. As long as we can keep the turtles out of it, it should start to spread slowly, but I wouldn't plan on it really taking off in the next 5 years. As much herbivory as we have out there, we've noticed that, stuff is just slow going.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to do more of those, probably like a cluster of 5 to 7 of those floating cages, and see how they do. Okay. And go from there. That's a brand new experiment for us. And we don't want them to be a navigation hazard too, because it's just a big floating
they're floating, right?
Piece of steel out in the lake, so we don't want to do too many of them either. So if we could do more, it'd probably be quicker, but we won't be able to do too many because of the navigational issues that they might provide. And they're all the way in the back of those coves at Harris that are roped off or buoyed off at the front to say danger on them.
Yeah.
So
my eyesight's poor. I usually head straight for the buoy Just so I can, yeah.
Yeah. And there are some more back there that don't have a buoy. They're on the bottom, and I don't think they put a buoy on those, and those have the eelgrass in them. So you can probably snag those with a lure if you're not careful. But they're all in that same little area back there. Any other questions on our summer activities?
Nothing's
Give people a few minutes here. And,
yeah, nothing's come up. Nothing else has come up in the chat.
Yeah, and you can see here we got David Hart and David Bukowski out putting our coontail in there. And I think they're going to go assess how this is done in the short term here in the next couple of weeks. So they'll go out there and look at how that's doing and see if anybody's messed with it.
Right.
And I think it's the first summer we've ever put that species in any of our lakes. Pretty novel idea for us. All right. Well, let's get into it. So we have a research component to what we do, and we also have a survey component. Most folks are probably more familiar with, just us getting out and doing our routine survey work of these lakes and seeing what's there and how many are there and that kind of thing. But we'd also have a whole research where we do sport fish research. Some folks might be familiar with our telemetry study at Lake Norman, where we have a bunch of receivers out there on the mile marker post at Lake Norman listening for hybrid striped bass, see how they're moving in the summer and where they're choosing to be, especially in the summertime when the water gets hot. So that's a research project we got going at Norman. We're also doing something similar on the Eno and the Flat rivers, in the actual rivers above Falls Lake. So we're tagging white bass there, and we're seeing how the spawning migrations up both of those rivers go. And we had about 15 receivers in the rivers to track those fish as they went up the river. And we do a surgery. We implant a tag in each fish, and then our receiver is basically a little black cylinder that listens for those tags as they swim by, and we can hear them if they're within a couple hundred yards. We can hear the tag, and then it's got a little internal computer in there that records at Lake Norman. It records the depth of the fish, the time of day, and the temperature of the tag. But our tags on the rivers just say the tag number and the time of day.
Are the fish tags themselves unique?
They are, yeah.
So know exactly which fish is swimming by. Okay. Nice.
And the Norman tags are really unique in that they have two different IDs for the temperature and the depth. So it's got a pressure sensor, and it measures the pressure, and then I guess it does an internal calculation to get the depth based on the pressure on the tag.
But you guys actually get a feel for any particular fish, how far he travels up and down the lake. And
yeah,
that's
nice. And hopefully we'll have some good results from those two. They're both wrapping up here in the next month, so we'll start. That's a mountain of data that we'll have to analyze. We'll start that process, and next year we'll hopefully be releasing some stuff on those two.
Do you know
those two research projects?
Number wise, like how many fish approximately are tagged?
I can only speak to the river project, and that was probably a total of about 60 fish.
Okay.
For that project, and a lot more at Norman, probably in the 80 to 90 range at Norman.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot more at Norman have died. They've had a lot of mortality with fishing and hot water and stuff like that. So we've lost a lot more of the fish at Norman.
Okay.
And then some people might remember our tag return survey there at Lake Norman, where we had just reward tags in the fish, and you'd call in a tag and get a reward as long as you told us where you caught it and how big the fish was and that kind of stuff. And then some people might remember at Lake Gaston, we had a creel survey where we had a creel clerk out interviewing folks about what they liked, what they didn't like, what they'd like to see different, and that kind of stuff. So we'll keep those going. They're pretty intermittent as to how often we do them, but we'll definitely have more creels going in the future. And I think we have some out there on the Gaston creel results. And then we do, especially the coastal staff and District 3, they do a lot of population monitoring of our, the actual anadromous fish, the long-term striped bass surveys to see, the number of adults on the spawning grounds and stuff like that. That's a big research project that they do with, and even genetics is tied into that, where they can track what group of hatchery stock, participated in spawning and gave to the fish that are catching now. So they can actually track back to what proportion of the fish we actually stocked in the river based on the allele frequencies. It's a pretty complicated thing to figure out. I'm not well versed in the genetics realm, but they're doing that with the striped bass and the Roanoke and stuff like that.
When this slide came up, I admit I had to go over to my other screen and Google allele.
Yeah.
So, talking about genes and chromosomes, and I'm like, yeah, that's beyond.
Yeah. It's a lot more genetics these days in fisheries. I'm getting almost mid-career now, so I'm learning new things with the genetics realm. And but yeah, it's cool that we can say, how much stock we contributed to the stock, and then they can even parse out wild fish from our fish using genetics. So it's really cool to see what they're doing there. That's basically mainly all the research we got going in the Piedmont right now, and we'll let everybody know as we come up with new things to look at on the research front. But our fish surveys are probably what everybody's most familiar with. Our resident fish surveys for largemouth crappie, and then our maronid species, the hybrids and striped bass. And basically the year of a fish biologist starts in the spring with largemouth shocking, and then summer into winter, when we're looking at fish in summer, it's typically catfish species. And then here in the next 3 weeks, I'll be out handling probably a few thousand crappie. I'll touch 3,000 to 5,000 crappie in October and November. And then in wintertime, we're just in the Piedmont, we're pulling gill nets for stripers and hybrids. And then
some of our guys will claim that they're going to handle, a couple thousand.
Yeah. You can see that one trap net there probably has 30 or 40 in it. And
oh yeah,
they get even more full than that one is there. So, and then in District 3 is our semi-coastal district. They've got the Tar River there, and they've got the small portion of the Noose, I think, in their district, and they do the spring runs of the coastal fish, the coastal stripers that may run up them rivers, and the American and hickory shad is a big part of their survey work. They do annual spring run surveys of those.
Yeah, a lot of guys go fish the shad run on the Noose, right?
So, yeah, and he's got the Noose from Falls Lake down to, so I forget where his line is, but yeah, he has to do that portion of the river just below Falls. And these gill nets are, we'll get into them a little more, but they are unfortunately our only method that we usually kill most of the fish that we catch in a gill net. So, but there's 3 key steps to any fish survey. So the data collection part, that's when we're getting out there with our various sampling methods and catching the fish, taking all our lengths, weights, all the measurements on them, doing all that. And then we do data analysis, which is all kinds of statistical tools we'll use on our length and weight data. And then we'll put that all, wrap it up and put it in a nice report. And if you ever want to see any of these reports, they're usually not public info, like posted on the website or anything. But if you email one of us, like want a report for a certain lake, we can get it to you.
Okay.
So that's always the best way to get them. So for largemouth, our resident fish surveys for largemouth, we're doing these typically in as early as March. If the water's, above 55 degrees, we can get out there and start getting some largemouth. And we usually can't go any later than the end of April. We learned that this year, where the end of April, they're really getting too deep for the field, and you'll kind of see them come up real deep, but you can't get a net on them. So really the end of April is about the extent of it. And this is using what's called pulsed DC electrofishing. So it's a direct current of electricity, and it's pulsed in different wave forms. So we can use long waves for certain fish, and typically it's a much shorter wave. and it's usually right at 1,000 volts, and the output's usually right between 6 and 8 amps from most of our boats. We can get up to 10, but we usually keep it at around 8 amps.
And we can't. You're 55 degrees in March. That's that affects. That's the depth of the fish more than anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, usually the depth and where they are in relation to coming on the bank to spawn. At Mycko, where it's a little warmer water, we've gotten there in like mid-March around the power plant and gotten in that hotter water and got them. But yeah, it's usually right there at the end of March when we get rolling.
Okay.
And water clarity is a big deal for electrofishing because it's kind of like a Goldilocks effect where we don't want it, muddy, blowed out, right after a rainstorm. We don't want it gin clear because then they can see us.
Right.
We want it just clear enough to where we can see them and net them, but not dirty where we can't see them. So it's right in between those two that we want to see.
Yeah.
And then catfish is a very dynamic species. We'll use all kinds of different things for catfish, all the way from hot heat of the summer all the way through, the coldest parts of the winter. We can use electrofishing for them as well, and that's a low frequency wave, so it's a longer wave that travels deeper and further into the water. And we usually have to have a chase boat in addition to the actual electrofishing boat. So you have a boat shocking and then a boat cruising around chasing the catfish that come up. And then the older school, that's kind of the newer school way to get your hands on a lot of catfish. Back in the day, it was a lot of baited hoop nets.
Okay.
And then we use that occasionally these days, but a lot of times it's that pulse low frequency long wave electrofishing. And the coastal river staff do a lot of these. Kyle Rachel's down in District 4 does a lot of catfish shocking on the Neuse River and then the Cape Fear River.
So I'm sure just about every lake you guys go to, you've sent a scuba diver down and he's white as a ghost because there's catfish down there the size of a Volkswagen that could eat a man.
Yeah, I don't know about Volkswagen, but I do know they've gill netted a 106 pounder out of Gaston, a blue catfish out of Gaston.
Wow.
So that's the biggest one I think we could get a hold of is right at 100 pounds before our gear couldn't catch them. So we've heard those stories, and you never know. Never say never, but I wouldn't say as big as a Volkswagen. But
every lake I've ever been around, I've heard that story about the people that went to repair the dam, and they came back and said, "We're not going back. The catfish beat you down there."
Yeah, I think 78 pounds is our state record flathead right now, and the blue just got broken this year. Does that sound right?
I don't know. I do know that the speckled trout just got broken down at Coast. State record got beat almost 10 pounds for a speckled trout down there now.
Okay.
But I didn't catch the catfish. Mark actually said the speckled trout record got broken twice this year. I'm assuming he's speaking about the spec.
See these comments. I couldn't look a note. Yeah, catfish are a relatively new species for me. When I was in South Carolina, we didn't look at them too often. And just in the past couple of winters, in District 5, we do a lot of winter sampling for catfish.
So he's saying the blue catfish record is the one that actually got broken this year. So we do now in our bass tournaments, in our kayak tournaments, we now have Mark as one of our sponsors, and he's actually he's a crappie guide on Jordan Lake.
Okay.
But we have a new prize called the wild card.
Okay.
So any fish you catch that's not a bass species, so whether it's a bowfin or a catfish or a crappie or whatever, you take a picture of it on your board and you bring it to the weigh-in and show, and there's a special prize for whoever catches the large non-bass species. And I think it's been a cat. If we've done it 5 times, a catfish has won it at least 4 of the time. You're not going to get a crappie that long.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because y'all are doing just length. So either a catfish or maybe a bowfin would be the one to go after.
A bowfin at Harris is going to win it one of these times.
Yeah.
There's some monster bowfin.
Oh yeah.
I know there's big ones in Jordan. I've seen some big ones in Jordan too, but
Yeah.
I've caught a monster on both lakes.
Yeah. Yeah. The bowfin's a fish we probably should look into a little more. It's not designated as a game species, so we're not like necessarily tasked to look into them. But it's probably a critter we need to keep an eye on a little more, I'd say.
Yeah, we have a gentleman who fishes with us, also with CKA, very involved in KBF, and Henry Vajon, Hank Vajon.
Okay.
He has a website. He's an author. He's a published author, novelist. So he actually has a website dedicated to bowfin fishing.
Okay.
Trying to change people's perceptions of the bowfin.
Yeah.
To me, it's a trash fish, and I hate it, and I don't want to catch one.
Yeah.
But I've caught two that if I'd have measured them or done the things, they were citation bowfins.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want to. I held my board. The last one I caught at Harris, I held the fish up still on I had the fish grips, and I held the board beside the fish. The board was 26 inches, and the fish was longer than the board.
Wow. Yeah.
That's enough.
We have a state record for that species. I'd have to look into that.
I'm sure Mark just posted that the blue cat record is 127.1.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure he's probably already looking up the bowfin record right now.
Yeah.
So when I caught my first big bowfin, and we went to Wilsonville store, and we were telling the owners and how big it was, they were like, you might have been pushing pretty close to the state record with that. You might should have, done a little more. And Mark just says 17 pounds in the Black River, he thinks.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, that first one I caught was 14 plus.
Yeah. So, yeah, it would have been knocking on the door for sure.
That was at Jordan, right across from the dam.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Out from the dam, and it was in a cove, and it hit a spinnerbait.
Okay.
And this was a long time ago, and I got it up close to the boat. When they're in the water, they can still somewhat resemble a bass.
Yeah.
And I started reaching down, and when I did, I also got the rod, got him up close to the water, and he opened his mouth.
Yeah.
And I saw all those teeth, and I looked at my father-in-law, and I said, "Well, are you going to get the hook out, or is it going to rust out? Because I'm not touching that thing." I figured I was going to cut the line, but we got him in the boat and stepped on him and held him down, and then got some talk.
Yeah, they're like, they flop around a lot when you get them in the boat. They don't really calm down much.
Very aggressive too. Yeah. So he said 17, 15, almost 18 pounds is the.
That's a big bowfin.
That's just a big fish. So
yeah. Yeah, so moving on to crappie. Crappie's a big one for us in the fall. So right when the nights really start to cool down, water temperatures not necessarily a big deal for this, but when the nights really start getting cold and the crappie start moving towards the banks at night, that's when we can get out with we call it a trap net, but I think the AFS definition of it is called a modified fyke net, where a fyke net has 3 leads that go out in the middle of the river channel. Ours just have 1 lead that goes to the bank, and we set it perpendicular to the bank in about 6 to 8 foot of water.
So like that diagram, they swim up to it.
And here we don't put any bait or anything like that in them. We just use the nature of fish to hit that lead line and just want to go deeper to get around the obstacle, and then it just funnels down into a purse where we trap them and net them, and then we'll come back the next morning, count them, and do all our surveys with them. And that in D5 we typically start right around the first week of October, and we'll go all the way into mid-November, right before Thanksgiving. And they do High Rock, I've heard, is a great lake for crappie surveys, and of course Jordan's our biggie here in D5, and do a lot at Falls and Gaston as well. So if you see these nets out, it's probably, we put these little orange buoys on them. You probably know that's one of ours out there surveying for crappie. It'll really open your eyes to how many crappie you can catch and why this method is illegal for the public to use, because some of the nets at Jordan can have 200 to 300 crappie in one net.
Wow.
Yeah, we really catch a bunch of crappie in them.
Now, are you tagging crappie at all in any manner, or are you just doing a survey of
Yeah, that's just the weigh and measure, and then the age, which we'll get into our age analysis. Age is a big one for crappie, age
Okay.
and growth. Yeah, and they're good eating too. And then our reservoir hybrid and striped bass, this is just the Piedmont lakes and just the reservoirs and inland reservoirs is where we use our gill net surveys. And these are typically in the winter. We don't want to do this in summer because of how stinky and nasty it would be when the fish get hot. So we're doing this mainly at Hyco, Gaston, Baden. You know, if it's got inland striped bass, we're usually gill netting to get our hands on the stripers. And it's an indiscriminate gear. So if it's in the lake, we usually catch it in this. We catch largemouth, spotted bass, crappie, all kinds of different species in this gear. And we'll try to, keep as many of those as alive as we can and just, get our hands on just the stripers. And we'll use a small mesh as small as a 1/4 inch all the way up to about a 4 inch. And they're set about 6 feet off the bottom with a big old long buoy line going to the surface. You can see there, that looks like a catfish and maybe a crappie hanging in that gill net there. People are probably familiar with these as a commercial fishing technique on the coast.
Do you is that done every year?
Yep. So we did Jordan annually until this winter. This will be the first winter in my career that we're not going to be on Jordan.
Okay.
So we've done Jordan for 4 winters, and I think they do Baden every winter. And I guess some folks might not know we are ceasing the stocking of striped bass at Jordan. So we have made that final decision this summer. We can get them to about 18 inches long, but they just don't seem to be, growing into, the size we want to see a striper get to. So we're probably going to not stock anymore. The fish that are in there will be in there for the next 5 to 7 years because we just stocked last summer, but we won't be putting any more age classes into Jordan.
I know that back in the like mid 2000s, so 10,
Yep.
10 well, no,
prior to 11.
There were actually striper clubs.
Yep.
Almost like you have bass clubs. There were striper clubs, and there were guides, striper guides on Jordan Lake. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you can see this question. Rumors of possible striper perch hybrid coming to Jordan.
Yeah, it would be like I mentioned here, the hybrid striped bass. It is in the works, but there is no final approval on any of that, and we'll keep working with DMF. DMF doesn't want the hybrids to escape the reservoir and get into the Cape Fear down like below all the locks and dams where they can interfere with the striped bass coming to spawn on the Cape Fear.
Right.
So we're dealing with those issues and working
now,
with DMF.
Is that the same hybrid that they used to stock at Jordan?
That's why they were collecting hybrids down in the Cape Fear below Lock and Dam 1, and that's what caused that program to be ceased and just stripers to be stocked. And the brood stock for the stripers are Cape Fear brood stock. So we get them out of the river, spawn them, and then stock the lake back with Cape Fear stripers to make sure that it's just those genetics staying in the river. But the Cape Fear's a whole bundle of issues right now, and hopefully those issues will allow us to start that program back up. But I'm not going to say it's happening anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah. So I think this photo was Jordan Lake. This was probably back in Corey Oakley's tenure in the district. He was surveying. That was probably the good years of Jordan. I think the water quality at Jordan has diminished a little bit, especially the summer. The summer water quality, the temperature in dissolved oxygen in the summer is probably not like it was. And we're seeing some of those issues come to play now in the stripers there. But Baden, I think, is a holdout a little bit for stripers. And Gaston is still probably number one within driving distance of Raleigh.
those are both deeper lakes too, right? So
Yeah, deeper, a little more flow through them. In summertime, if we don't get rain, there's not a ton of water moving through Jordan.
that's right.
Um,
That's right.
they'll keep it full so they can supply the water to the city and not let it leave the reservoir. They'll keep it. The water leaving the reservoir is going to drinking water. It's not necessarily going down the river at Jordan. The deep probably supplies a lot of the summer water to the Cape Fear.
Here's a 24.5-inch striper.
Wow. Yeah, and that there probably will be some bigger fish in the coming years because we're not putting so many in anymore, and we'll have some mortality, and then that'll just produce a smaller population, and that should just mean less competition for each individual, and we'll see slightly larger fish as a result of that. But we just didn't see the amount of age classes. They get to like age 4 to 6. 6 was an old fish in Jordan, and we should, in a lot of lakes we can see them get to 10, 12 years old. So the age was a big determining factor for us, not necessarily the size.
Yeah. So Keith says, overall, how healthy are the different species currently in District 5? And is there something maybe that we as kayakers should look to champion, to help protect the fishing future?
Yeah, so I know it's hard to harvest fish out of a kayak, but lakes like these city lakes like Kamak, we could use a lot more bass harvest at those reservoirs where we're almost getting stunted bass populations. So if we can just take as many out as we can, I know there is a strange limit there at Kamak. I forget what it is. It's like a modified slot limit. So you have to look at the local regulations on each lake. But, any of those lakes where you catch 20, 30 bass a day, they need a lot more harvest. We really want to see that. And
we used to just take fish, right?
Yeah, but you got to follow the law, of course. So don't take any more than whatever.
I know. But I mean, back in the day, just everybody kept their fish.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of overcompensated and went the other way. And catch and release is a great thing, and I think we all see the benefit of it. But if you don't ever keep fish, it's just like you said. You end up stunting the growth of the population as a whole. So it's it's hard to balance, I guess. You don't want everybody keeping their fish, but you want to keep some. So, and the other thing I see too, and the thing I hate to see is shaming. Facebook shaming. I can't believe you kept those fish. Anytime somebody posts a fish and if they're on the shore and you can look like they've either got them on a stringer or something, everybody just gets blasted.
Yeah. Yeah. In some lakes that's necessary. Some of our lakes that have a spillover dam, I think they lose some bass just over the spillway. So we don't see as many of those stunting issues, but lakes like Kamak and even Mycko now are seeing large catch rates of largemouth at those lakes. And we'd like to see, more people keeping their catch there. At our bass tournament lakes where bass boats are fishing tournaments, we're seeing a lot of tournament associated mortality that are helping us at those lakes. So hopefully the tournament mortality is making up for the lack of harvest at, the big three, Jordan Falls in particular, that's probably making up for it. So.
And Dave Hart.
The harvest is one. And then on crappie, it's all about water level in the spring. So if we get some good high water in the spring, crappie will do well. And if we get dry springs, we'll see crappie ebb and flow.
So Dave Hart is asking, he said, hybrids were introduced in 2019 at Mycko.
Mm-hmm.
And how's the population look to you guys?
Yeah, I should have put a little update in here about that. So it's looking really good. I think we just took the harvest moratorium off this year, so you can actually harvest fish in Mycko now. The biggest ones we saw were about 22 inches there, which is probably those oldest fish from 2019. They were 3 to 4 inches in 2019. Now they're about 20 to 22. And we'll hopefully see some 26 to 28 inch fish in that lake if they get to 5 years. We don't anticipate them growing, lasting much more than 5 because of how hot it gets. But yeah, they're really persisting well, and this fall should be a great time to go to Hyco and catch some schooling hybrids up there at Hyco. So as soon as the water starts to cool down and those shads starting to move up the creeks, I'd be venturing to Hyco. It's not a great kayaker's lake because there's only one ramp, and you got to put in at that ramp and go from there. But it's definitely a growing fishery there. I'd say in the next 2 years we'll have a really good hybrid fishery.
That's I've never been there, but man, I miss the days when the hybrid used to start schooling on Jordan.
Yeah. Hopefully those days will come back, but we'll see. Gaston, I think, is still a good strong holdout for stripers in the Piedmont, and it'll likely be the last lake that gets stripers because it's just getting so hot, stagnant in the summertime these days. This summer was a prime example of how these lakes can just get so hot and stagnant. But yeah, Dave, I agree with that. There's only one legal launch for a kayak there in Hyco, and it's right on the main river channel. All righty. But yeah, those are good questions about the hybrids. Hopefully we've had issues with the brood stock. We have to get stripers out of the Dan River. The stripers coming out of Bugs Island, running up the river, and we kind of have to intercept them at just the right time of year. And we've missed them the past couple years until this year. We had a decent year for our striper brood stock, and hopefully we continue to play that timing game right, where we can get our big. They want big females, but not too big. So it's kind of like, where they can survive on the truck to get to the hatchery and still produce a lot of eggs.
I had no idea that's how that happened. You have to catch them in the wild, catch them live in the wild, and take them to the hatchery.
Yeah, the way our warm water hatchery set up, they can't really persist stripers on site, so they'll think they release them every year after they're done spawning them out. Don't quote me on that part, but I think they get rid of them somehow, and every year we have to resupply them with more brood stock. And we get the white bass sometimes. We cross them with a striper and a white bass, the white bass males and the striper females. We get the white bass out of either Jordan or Falls Lake typically.
Okay.
Yeah, send them down the road to Watha. Watha is down east, and that's where just about every striped bass in the state is grown at Watha.
Okay.
So the data collection when we're out there, once we actually get the fish in the boat, that's when our data collection starts. It's typically just length, weight, and age for each fish. If we catch 600, we'll get 600 length, weights, and ages, or not necessarily all the ages, but definitely all the lengths and weights and ages, slightly different. And then sometimes we'll do auxiliary data collection like genetics. We've been taking a lot of fin clips on largemouth to get genetic samples that we'll send to Auburn University. We'll take, just a note of their spawning condition. Are they pre-spawn, post-spawn? Do they look like they've been, beat up during a spawn? And then our weather variables just for our records, so we'll know if, the lake we were at this week was high, so maybe we didn't catch as many fish because of that, and just the weather and water conditions can be important data to have for, especially like, when we have a lot of staff changes and people moving up, people go back through the old records, they'll know kind of why certain data looks the way it does. And here, that's a big flathead. That's probably out of Jordan Lake there. Big flathead out of Jordan. If we encounter these invasive fish species, we'll typically euthanize them and take a length and a weight on them just so we can document how them fish are acting in our lakes. So length, pretty self-explanatory. Just the total length. We use the metric system, so all of our lengths are in millimeters typically. Get a total length of the fish, and then we'll weigh it. We have pretty high-quality scales that we weigh to the nearest gram. Each fish will get a weight for. And then the biggie is their age. So this is always interesting to a lot of folks. Most hard structures of a fish grow just like a tree. They put down a daily ring. on all their bones, all the scales, and they have an inner ear structure called an otolith, which translates this Latin for ear stone. So it floats in their ear canal, and it tells them how they're oriented in the water, whether they're nose down or tail down or flopped over to one side. That's how they orient themselves in the water column. And we'll count the rings. They literally have a period of slow growth and a period of fast growth in the summer, where those rings stack up closer to each other. So that fast growth is those longer places between each of the white. So the white is each winter. So white is the winter ring, and we can say that each one of those is a year. And it's across the board for all species. It's the best way to tell exactly how old a fish is in years. So we'll get that. We usually get that for about 10 to 20% of the survey. So if we catch 600 fish, it'll be 150, 200 otoliths that we'll take from each fish. And that's how we know how they're growing versus how old they are. So that's where length couples with age. And this is always pretty interesting. So I'll stop here for a few questions if we have any on otoliths.
Do you have, is that, for lack of a better word, is that terminal for the fish to have to?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, in D5, we have a hog farmer that we work with, and we'll donate our fish to a local organic hog farm. I think every district's different, but that's the way we do it.
Okay.
He's super local to our depot. It makes it a lot easier for him to run by and grab them. So I joke that we turn some bass into barbecue here in D5. But it's not every fish in the survey either. I'd say it's 20% max.
If we can, if you guys can turn the fish into barbecue, and maybe Jesus will come back and turn some water into wine, we'll just go
yeah. And this top left photo, that's actually a scale. That older grayscale image is a scale, not an otolith. So you can see the rings on the scale. They're a little harder to age with a scale. But this bottom right is the otolith and how we look at them. Do
you require a microscope on either one?
Yep, we just bought us a nice new scope, a good stereo, kind of like a old dissection scope you'd use in school, except ours is a lot more finely tunable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And crappie, we usually see them get to 6 to 10 years old. 10 years old is an old crappie, and largemouth I've seen as old as 17, 18 years old. We had a 16-year-old this year at Lake Reese, was the oldest fish we captured. So they can live a long time out there, and we'll see later where their growth will plateau. Where an 18-year-old is not necessarily 18 pounds. They get to a certain age where they just plateau off. Dave, he was 9. That was the photo in my introduction slide. It was 9 pounds, 4 ounces. And unfortunately, we did have to turn that one into barbecue to know he was 16 years old. So length is our first component we look at. We do what's called a length frequency histogram for these, and it's really important for the overall population trend. This is how we know if there's a stunning situation going on, like I mentioned at Camac, where most of the fish would be less than 350 millimeters probably, and we'd see like a stacking effect in these plots there. For crappie, it helps us know if there's a lack of a certain size, that maybe it's being over harvested at a certain friable size, something like that. And we just look at the overall capture of how the population's doing on a length standpoint. So this will show us that, and we really want to see a good bell curve like this bottom figure shows, just a good bell curve shape to it. That way we know it's a healthy population out there. The one on top, it's probably a little more smaller fish than we'd like to see, but still nothing like a Camac situation would be skewed all the way to the left pretty much. But length isn't the entire picture. We also want to know what's called relative weight or body condition. And I always tell anglers that this is the fish that you want to catch, right? So you want to fish with a high relative weight. We see a lot of, and typically if there's a forage situation going on, like where there's not enough forage to eat, though this will happen. But 9 times out of 10 is typically an overpopulation issue where there's just too many predators in the system. And we'll see these, they'll be long. Some of them get 16, 18 inches long, but they'll be very skinny, like this top bass here and this top crappie. These crappie are the same length, but you can see the difference in the body condition between those two crappie.
Yeah.
So we look at that, and that tells us mainly about the competition in the system and how many fish we might have out there. And this is where we would, and tell the anglers to harvest as many as they legally can. And then this is a plot that we look at. This actually tells us the relative weight for each age class. And of course, you'll see that get slightly larger as the fish get older. And then the age comes into play. So age, even though it is a terminal portion for the fish, we love to know how old these fish are just so we can see the maximum age that they're getting to. We know for most fish species now, we know how old the oldest individual could be, so we can compare that. The mean age is important to us to make sure they're not all, too young or too old. And the range of the ages is very important to make sure we got a good spread of ages out there. If they're all real young, we could have an issue. And if they're all very old, that could be a problem as well for future of the fishery. But this plot here shows what we're looking for ages, especially for largemouth. We want to see a lot of, 1s, 2s, and 3s. That way we know those are going to grow into those 3s, 4s, and 5-year-old fish that people want to catch. And this is kind of based on sampling methods too, where the older, bigger fish aren't necessarily easy to catch for us. Angling can actually be a better method for catching those fish. And we don't see a lot of those 10-plus-year-old bass because they really just get away from us real easy. So they're not represented in our samples a lot. And then we'll couple the age with the growth. So length at an age is very important to us. We want to see just a steady growth. And then we know what's called a length infinity for each fish, for each survey and each population. And that'll tell us, the maximum potential length for a lake, which is usually for largemouth right at 500 millimeters. That's probably 22 inches, 22 to 24 inches is what a lot of our lakes level out at. So Jordan in particular, I think is like 24 inches. If you catch one over 24 inches in Jordan, that's probably the oldest fish in the lake. And the rate or the speed of this curve is important to us. We don't want it to, shoot up to 400 millimeters at age 2. That could be an issue. And we don't want it to be super slow where it's, 5 years to get to 400. This is a good steady curve that we want to see. And that's what that age data allows us to do is plot this. And if you remember your stats courses, it's called a regression is what we're running there, linear regression. So I'll stop here in case anybody has any questions about how the age couples with growth and why we need the age and the length. I guess not.
Not so far.
And crappie, it's a little different story than bass. Growth in crappie can be highly variable, especially lake to lake. So we don't look into the age and growth curve so as deeply as we do the largemouth because of the variable size and growth they can have. Thanks, Keith.
So, going off of what he said, is that you were fishing before you figured out what you wanted to do? Is that kind of what drove you into?
Yeah, at one point I thought I was going to be Kevin Van Dam or Mike Iaconelli. In high school, I probably thought that. And then I started fishing against Jordan Lee. I actually weighed in right behind Jordan Lee one time, and I fished against his brother a lot. His brother was more in my age group coming up, Matt Lee. And I realized I couldn't hang with the big dogs on the bass fishing world. So I was already in wildlife at the time, but that just solidified my career plan of going into the science and not necessarily the fishing. And here I am. I'm 5 years into North Carolina and Lord, 12 years into my career, including grad school now. So I'm mid-career even, almost. So
I think it'd be good for a lot of local guys to have to fish against some of them.
yeah, it's eye-opening when you fish in those 200 to 300 boat tournaments. That they're a lot different than your little local jackpot. But they're fun. They're definitely fun to get into, but they can humble you. Yeah. So basically, when the age couples with growth, that's why we got to know how old the fish are. And that all leads to what we call fishery condition. So that's where we'll look at that length-age relationship, make sure that's a slow but steady growth to a maximum potential size. Couple that with body condition, make sure that the fish are fat, as plump as a fisherman want them to be. And we make sure that all the year classes that could be represented and that we can potentially catch, that we see those out there. There could be a year with a bad spawn where we can say, oh, we didn't have the 2019 year class, so maybe let's look at the water level and see if it was a low water or something that spring. So that's what looking at year classes help us. And then, like I said, the overall shape of these plots is important to us. We just want a good steady bell curve. And if we see that, we know we got a good population of fish out there. And Mayo we did in 2021. So I have the data from Mayo. Tanner, if you want to email me or call me, I can get you a summary of that survey. It was pretty. I remember it being a pretty good survey. Nothing too crazy there. No red flags, at least. And we don't really have a ranking system as far as fishery condition goes. We'll just try to remember and highlight the lakes that are good, and then like lakes like Kamak, we'll remember those conditions and try to get the word out as best we can. With the lack of harvest, we have fish management. It's getting a little harder these days because we used to use a lot of harvest regulations to manage these fisheries, but that's getting a little harder, and we're trying to figure out how to go in the future with this data.
I know you may or may not know this answer, but I get asked this a lot about the slot limit at Harris, and I think a lot of us understand kind of the purpose of it, right? Like you're not risking, a target size fish in your live well, but is there any point that you know of that maybe they go back to a normal limit at Harris, or it didn't affect the kayakers as much because we just catch them and take a picture, but I know the bass boaters.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes going on at Harris right now. Hopefully they'll stable out. I don't think that they've seen a drastic change in the actual population like what this data shows them for Harris. I don't think there's been a drastic population level change. I think they've seen some behavioral changes there at Harris, where the fish are a little more offshore and a little deeper these days. Hopefully our habitat work will help with that once we get some weeds growing that they can get into up shallow. But my few conversations I've had with the biologist there, David Bukowski, who some people are familiar with from our last talk, is in charge of Harris, and he said it's just more of a behavioral change that the bass are going through there, and they haven't seen any major population level changes. But I wouldn't be too surprised to see that regulation change in some form, but I don't know where they'll land on that.
Dave, you can tell Dave doesn't like Heiko at all.
Yeah, Heiko is borderline stunted situation. We calculate what's called a catch per unit effort, which is just bass per hour of electrofishing time. And at Hyco, it's over 100 fish per hour, which is
Well,
a
he
high
said
number.
it's a numbers lake. He
Yeah.
said that it's definitely for
Yeah.
him a numbers lake. So
We like to see like a 60 to 80 range in CPUE. And it's, sometimes some years it's double what we want it to be at Hyco.
wow.
So, and the lack of tournament pressure probably, and the entry fee there is pretty high if you don't have the annual pass. So I bet just the general lack of fishing pressure is hitting that lake now. If I
So-
were going to speculate on it.
Dave actually negotiated with them some this year on a trial basis, because they have such a large, high launch fee.
Mm-hmm.
He negotiated with them to do a $10 launch fee for kayaks. Just to see if it helped change. And we are in talks with them about doing one of our tournaments there next year.
Okay.
But it's going to hinge, it's like I said, we're in talks. So it's going to hinge on what they tell us. Tanner's mentioning here, something I touched on, that people used to keep a lot more fish, and do you see a big change in the size of fish as a result of catch and release?
Yeah, we do. Some lakes are better than others. Like I said, anywhere we have a lot of tournament pressure, the PBC lakes and the BFL lakes, my theory is that the tournament pressure and the fish beating up in against each other in live wells and things like that are creating what's called post-release mortality, where the tournaments are actually killing some fish. I know it's sad for fishermen to hear that, but we think that's making up for the lack of harvest now. It's just trading one for the other in those lakes. But these small city lakes, a lot of them where we don't see a lot of anglers keeping fish anymore, where a lot of the harvest fishermen are starting to, get a little older, not be able to fish as much. We're seeing those population numbers go way up. Kamak in particular. In my district, Kamak is the only one I'd label as stunted, I'd say. And I think they have one in District 6 that's near that condition as well. D3, I think, might not have any.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we definitely want to see more harvest. And, water quality issues in summer are going to become an issue with our development around Raleigh. I don't want to speculate too much on that because I'm not a water quality expert, but I could see that becoming a looming threat for us as well. And the fish surveys will allude to that, but there's a whole nother division of the state that looks into our water quality.
Yep.
Yeah. So harvest and water quality will be our two things to watch out for. And you guys are probably got very limited amount of tournament mortality unless you just hook a fish bad. So you're probably, really.
We're not helping things at all then, are we?
Probably not. But at lakes like Jordan, you don't need to be. But
Right.
at lakes like some of the city lakes,
Yeah,
you could, consider doing a keep tournament where you just put them on a stringer, something like that.
yeah. Do a Kamak, keep your fish at Kamak.
That's right. Yeah. I don't remember exactly what the regulation is there, but it's somewhat liberalized. It's not necessarily 5 fish there. It might be a 10 fish krill.
Oh, good gracious.
Yeah.
We could have one heck of a fish fry though for the week.
So yeah, that's in all these age and growth data. That's how we know how to make those recommendations. So we go to about 5 lakes a year in District 5. We have 23 reservoirs we're responsible for the fish in. And we try to do about 5 lakes a year. This year in particular, we learned that 5 is probably our maximum output, especially for spring electrofishing when the water heats up. So,
you guys end up having to help. There's basically 2 biologists in a district, right? So do you end up having to go help another district do theirs and they come help you do yours? I can imagine 2 guys probably can't handle.
Yeah, and we actually have a lot of female biologists these days, and we actually have a female district biologist about to go out on maternity leave. So we do a lot of picking up field work for them when they go out to go on maternity leave.
Yeah.
It's a big thing that we've done lately. But usually we'll spend about a week on each lake, and 2 people can do a lake in a week.
Okay.
So that's 5 weeks for each season.
Uh, 10 fish a day.
Oh,
Dave.
yeah, there it is. I should know that better. But yeah, 10 fish and only
only
2.
two of them.
Yeah, so it's like a modified trophy limit, I guess you'd call it, where you can only have 2 over 14.
So if
A
we're
true
going to
trophy limit would
have
be
a fish
20.
fry, it's going to be like fish veal.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
it'll be the little ones.
yeah. And it's not a bad condition. If you really want to take a small kid bass fishing, they're great lakes to go to. But if you want to go with a big glide bait, it might not be the best lake to go to. But I don't know. Some anglers argue against me about that. Like, they say it's full of big fish, but I think they've just figured out how to catch those biggest ones in there.
Yeah, they're able to single out the big one.
Yeah. But yeah, all of our data collection and everything that leads to our research and reporting. We have a research coordinator for each region. So there's 3 across the state, and they do a lot of our actual publishing in scholarly articles and journals in the actual peer-reviewed publications. And then all of our district level stuff usually goes on our website. This website here, ncwildlife.org/fishing/learn-resources monitoring surveys. We put a lot of our fact sheets there. And then we just, try to button everything up, put a big bow on it, and put it out there for people to digest. I have this report ready. If anybody wants to see it from Jordan, you have to email us to get our survey reports. Michael Fisk, he used to be our research coordinator. He was very instrumental in catfish research down on the coast. Our newest, who I replaced, Kelsey, she's published a lot on white bass, our research on white bass. And then our supervisor now, Lawrence, has done a lot of work with our Alabama bass species and how they're affecting our lakes. So there's a lot out there.
Yeah. Well, if anybody else has any questions,
we'll sum it all up and
go ahead and throw them up here.
Call it a night.
I know when we started, my wife was in there cooking dinner.
Oh, okay.
There's a nice smell.
We'll let you go get some food then.
A nice smell coming around through the house right now. Not fish though. Well, while we wait for a question, like Keith said, I think every one of us, I know you guys don't go into this profession for the fame or the money, and we appreciate what you guys do and your efforts in trying to restore things where we have problems in our fisheries and getting data together so we can manage them. Anything we can do to help you spread that message, the education, of people understanding what these studies do and the surveys do, and, that these native grasses don't come back, as quick as they do, as quick as people expect them to, nature's been around, since the beginning of time. So it's hard for us to reproduce it. And, but we do appreciate all of you guys' efforts. We appreciate you taking part in this and helping us, educate the population a little bit. It doesn't take much effort on my part at all.
Yeah.
You've done all the research and you share all the presentation, and I just get to sit back and watch it and ask a couple questions. But
hopefully there's some news coming out on bass genetics. I'm sure people have seen us out at the boat ramps and weigh-ins doing fin clips, and hopefully our next one can focus more on the genetics results we're seeing on those.
How much collaboration is there between states?
A lot. Yeah, we just had I wasn't involved, but we had a North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia meeting, and I bet Alabama bass was the number one topic there. That critter definitely is our number one threat for our lakes, for sure.
And you
like I
mentioned,
said about over competition and stunting, they definitely are the definition of doing that in the lake. So,
Auburn University earlier,
yeah,
sending some fish there. Are there certain, I guess not all, every university kind of has different specialties and things. Are there other universities that are strong in fish genetics and things like that besides Auburn?
yeah, Yale, believe it or not. Yale just published a big paper on largemouth and I think overall black bass genetics. And then there's a university I think in Texas that
I would
does.
guess, I would guess that.
Yeah.
We watched the big BASS event where BASS has one event every year where their catch weigh
Yeah.
release. They have officials in the boat, and I do
Yeah.
know that I've also seen both on MLF and Bass where some of these guys are catching big fish, and they mention that they're having to do DNA tests. And Dave's Mitch, no, NC State is just cows. So it's funny Dave says that because I was in the prior to the company I work with now, I was in animal health space.
Okay.
And we worked with started off with dairy cows and then moved into beef cattle.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time at the vet school, believe it or not, in labs at the vet school.
Okay.
Doing blood differentials.
Okay.
Of all things, we started off doing blood differentials in milk.
Milk. Okay.
There are white blood cells in milk, and you can
Okay.
see whether a cow has recently had an infection, currently has an infection, based on the different types of white blood cells you see. And then we moved into blood for beef cattle and trying to get but that was always interesting. I kind of I've got a couple fields here. I keep wanting to put some cows in them because I got so attached to cows. But,
there you go.
But yeah, it'd be nice if State did some fishing stuff too. They do have the bass pack. That's as close as we'll get, I guess.
Yeah, we've lost a couple of our professors. We had at NC State. We had one move away, and then we actually one of them had a sudden heart attack, and we lost one of our oldest, most perennial fisheries professor at State. He just had a heart attack this year. So some people might know the name Tom Quat. We've really been mourning his loss this year is a big loss to State. So hopefully they'll rehire his position and get some fisheries folks back.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much. Very informative. I think thank everybody that has tuned in live, and thanks for all the questions and the comments. That to me, that's one thing that kind of makes this flow a little better. When you guys are asking questions, we know that you're interested in what we're talking about, and so HICO is evidently a really hot topic to talk about. The hybrids are a hot topic to talk about, and even
we could focus if hybrids are hot, we could do all on hybrids eventually too, and really focus in on our hybrids out there.
Yeah.
So we're putting them in a couple small lakes these days. We put them in Farmer, which is like 300 or 400 acres, and we've got them in Oak Hollow, which is another small little reservoir.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you very much. We'll sign off. Look forward to doing this again as soon as you're able.
Yep.
And again, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks everybody that watches the replays, and hope you learned something. Drop some comments, and just let us know that you're watching and that you're interested, and we'll keep these things going.
All right. Thanks.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
See y'all.